regime. And then, after the Second World War, which the Nazis triggered, Germany was split for 40 years into two countries, one of them under the totalitarian Stalinist rule of communism. No freedom, no democracy, no human rights, no rule of law. So you may understand that after the Second World War, when Germany elaborated a new constitution, and now it wanted to be the good guy again, they learned a lot from the failure of the first democratic constitution of Weimar of 1919, and they inserted a lot of precautions in the new constitution, the basic law, to prevent any kind of dictatorship, totalitarianism, and authoritarianism in the future. Democracy, human rights, rule of law are three fundamental concepts nowadays of the modern constitutionalism. But they are under permanent threat. Indonesia has experienced that itself. It has turned into a dictatorship under the dictator Suharto. So they also know about that experience. Democracies are not stable. In history, most turned once or several times into authoritarianism. The enemies of democracy never stop fighting it. There are the corrupt former elites striving to regain their unjustified privileges, which they lost in the democracy. There are political and religious extremists of all kinds trying to impose their ideology and to eliminate freedom, trying to establish again a totalitarian rule. There are ultra-conservatives defending so-called traditional values in all countries. But when you have a closer look at these traditional values, this means anti-democratic, anti-human rights, preserving privileges for old elites. They are all interested to turn democracy into an authoritarian regime. The classical way for that would be a coup d'etat or a revolution. This has happened a lot. The coup d'etat of Suharto, for example, in Indonesia, lots of coup d'etats in history of Africa, for example. The modern way to abolish democracy is more subtle, but also more dangerous. Winning elections with populist policies and undermining democracy from within. There are lots of examples like Turkey, the Philippines under Duterte, like the attempts in Brazil and even in the USA, Russia. There are lots of countries where this has happened. Now I will show you a little bit my materials. Please, ladies and gentlemen, download them from my website. I show you my website. Just a moment. That takes a little bit. There. Now you can see my website, www.thomas-schmitz-your Carta ID. And there you can download the materials. And if you have a closer look on my materials, you will see that there are some parts underlined. So here, for example, my practical instruction, how to become a dictator. If you click on these passages which are underlined, there is a link. So I will show you now that now I have a different paper. This is what I often present in my courses. What would you need to do to become a bloody dictator? This is not to teach you for your job, but this is to teach you how to prevent that. I describe the steps you need to take to turn a functioning democracy into an authoritarian system. And ladies and gentlemen, I also give you the examples where that has happened. Hungary, Poland, Turkey, Russia, and so on. It's only important, if you want to become a bloody dictator, that you follow these steps in the right order, because otherwise you will meet resistance. And then it is possible to turn a democracy into an authoritarian system. It's very sad, my ladies and gentlemen, but it has happened a lot of time. So I want you to sensibilize if this happens in your country. One of the precautions to prevent that is the concept of defensive democracy. We call that wehrhafte Demokratie. It has been first developed in 1937 already by the originally German scholar Karl Löwenstein, who had immigrated to the US in reaction to the downfall of the democratic Weimar Republic and the rise to power of Adolf Hitler. This German professor needed to leave his country. When he worked in the US, he developed that idea. His core thesis is democracy must protect itself against those who want to destroy it, if it's from inside or from outside. Otherwise, it will perish. May I ask, ladies and gentlemen, you can see my presentation, right? Okay, sometimes it does not work correctly with Zoom. That's why I need to ask. So, democracy must protect itself. It's not enough to establish democracy and think, oh, then it will work. No. The enemies of democracy will never stop fighting it. And ladies and gentlemen, we are just watching that in the USA. It's not yet sure if Donald Trump, with his efforts to overthrow the American democracy and establish an authoritarian regime like in Russia or in Turkey, will not be successful at the end. This concept is nowadays implemented in numerous democratic countries. So many countries have taken some of these steps. It is, however, a concept to protect a functioning democracy against abuse. It is not a concept to compensate for the flaws of a dysfunctional political system under a poorly conceived constitution. If the constitution does not work at all, if it always crashes, the concept of defensive democracy alone cannot help. What is now the rule of the law in the defense of democracy? Most precautions and most instruments to save democracy involve sensitive restrictions of political rights. Therefore, they require a constitutional basis. So they must be anchored themselves in the Constitution. But they will be regulated in detail in ordinary laws. So ordinary laws implementing the constitutional ideas. Some of these ordinary laws form part of the state organizational law. These are simple laws, acts of parliament, which organize the state and the institutions. Other laws will form part of administrative law. Both topics, state law, Tata, Negara, Tata, Negara, and administrative law will be involved. The respective constitutional law and the ordinary laws, the acts of parliament, must be seen as a unity. The ordinary laws must be interpreted and applied strictly in line with the constitution, which always enjoys primacy. So it's a block of constitutional law, state organizational law, and also administrative law. Not so easy in some details for the lawyers. Now I come to my main part. How has the concept of defensive democracy been implemented in the German constitutional and ordinary law? Well, there are a couple of instruments, but first some general remarks. The German constitution, the basic law of 1949, has learned from the failures of its predecessor, the Constitution of Weimar of 1919. It has shown a very successful, sustainable reaction to the failure of the 1919 Constitution and the rise of the National Socialists. It has been successful for more than 70 years in organizing a stable, capable, and defensive democracy. However, ladies and gentlemen, nowadays, like in almost all Western countries, the US, all European Union countries, and also in other countries like in Southeast Asia, democracy, rule of law, human rights are under attack in Germany too. So now we have quite a problem to preserve democracy in Germany too. And the basic law needs to prove that its instrument will work effectively. The German system builds primarily on the effective control of public power by the independent judiciary. The most important for the defense of democracy is the judicial defense against authoritarian measures. We have powerful courts with independent, truly independent judges, which cannot be influenced by the government, by religious groups, by social pressure groups, which do not care even if there should be 300,000 haters demonstrating on the street. They just follow the law and nothing else. And we have a fundamental right to effective legal protection against public authority. So that shall prevent authoritarian measures that would violate political freedoms or other citizens' rights. Moreover, the fundamental rights, that means the human rights anchored in the Constitution, you could also say the constitutional rights, they are directly binding law. So every civil servant is in the whole country is directly obliged to follow and respect the human rights under the Constitution, the fundamental rights. He cannot say, I just followed orders or I just applied a law. The citizen is not, the civil servant is not allowed to execute a law which violates the constitutional rights of the citizen. It's the primary mission of the court within its jurisdiction to defend the fundamental rights. Every court must defend the constitutional rights of the citizen within its jurisdiction. We don't have a special court for human rights because that would disregard the importance, the significance of human rights in the legal system. Every court is a human rights court, and within its jurisdiction, it must fight, it must stop any kind of authoritarian measure which violates human rights under the Constitution, like freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and so on. We also have a powerful federal constitutional court with comprehensive jurisdiction of constitutional review of laws. We have not only the abstract constitutional review of laws, like in Indonesia, but also the concrete constitutional review of laws in the individual case. That means every court in the country can submit an application to the Federal Constitutional Court to check the constitutionality of the law, which that court must apply in its individual case. This is a very powerful instrument. Finally, we have individual constitutional complaints. Every citizen can file a constitutional complaint before the Federal Constitutional Court and say, my fundamental rights under the Constitution have been violated. That shall prevent authoritarian laws that would violate democratic principles, the rule of law, or fundamental rights. These measures have been quite successful in German history. By the way, the judiciary has a double function. It must not only protect against authoritarian measures, but also against measures of defensive democracy if they are abusive or excessive. So, for example, the government may take measures and pretend that they are just defending democracy, but in reality, they want to stop a rival political party or organizations that criticize them. So, we need to be careful. All of the measures to defend democracy are sensitive themselves. There is a high risk of abuse or that these measures can be excessive. So the control by the judiciary plays an important role. That is, of course, a problem in Southeast Asia, where the judiciary is not as strong and independent as in Germany. You need to, or in Europe. You need to know that in Germany, even a simple administrative judge in the provincial town does not have any problem to bash the government and to annul, and it would not care what the government says, what the president says, what several 100,000 demonstrators on the street says. The judge would just follow the law and defend the human rights under the Constitution. In particular, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of association. The professionality and the integrity of the judges, but also the trust of the citizens in the courts, is a pre-legal condition for that system in Germany. And, ladies and gentlemen, it did not work like that under the Weimar Constitution. At that time, the judges defended the dictatorship. They wanted to go back to the old dictatorship monarchical system. So, you may understand that some measures which we discuss now to make sure that the judges are not fighting the Constitution themselves, they are very important. Now we come to the individual precautions and instruments to defend democracy. You see on my paper, it starts with A, goes to J. It's quite a number of individual precautions. First of all, the prohibition of political parties that seek to undermine or abolish the free and democratic basic order. So, political parties who fight against democracy, rule of law, human rights, can be prohibited. Well, that's not a surprise for Indonesia, because Indonesia has this concept too. In Indonesia, that has more or less been copied and pasted from the German model. Such parties can be declared unconstitutional, but only by the Federal Constitutional Court. By the way, all the Federal Constitutional Court's decisions to defend democracy must be taken by a 2/3 majority of the judges. You see, high precautions against abuse. 2/3 of the judges must vote in favor of these measures. The prohibition of political parties by the Federal Constitutional Court has only brought 2 successful cases so far. Not much. A colleague of mine asked me if I could not talk in his lecture about the prohibition of political parties here at UGM, because he says that system does not work in Indonesia. Nothing is happening. Well, and I needed to tell him, in Germany, it only works very, very little. Why? The Federal Constitutional Court requires sound evidence that the party pursues its fight against democracy in an actively militant, aggressive manner. It's not enough that they speak out against democracy, like, for example, conservative religious groups, where you just have old men who said this is not good, but then they don't do anything. Or conservative nationalists in Europe, but they don't do anything. No, it must be fighting actively in a militant, aggressive manner. And that must be proved, and therefore applications need long, thorough preparation. Often such an application needs to be prepared for 10 years. Once the political party is declared unconstitutional, all party members will lose their seats in all parliaments and even in the local councils, local government councils. So once a political party is prohibited, that instrument will be effective. There have been two failed attempts recently. One in 2003, an attempt to prohibit the right-wing extremist party NPD, National Party of Germany. It failed because state undercover agents and investigators had infiltrated this party to prepare the application, but they were influencing the party's executive committees, and it was not sure anymore how much is the influence of the state, how much is the influence of the party itself. In 2017, a second attempt to prohibit that party failed, although now the Constitutional Court assessed that the NPD was unconstitutional. But now the Constitutional Court required that it must be possible that the party's action against the free and democratic basic order could be successful. That means if the party is fighting actively in a militant, aggressive manner, but it does not have any chances, it will anyway not be prohibited. That was the case because this LPD had become a club of old men, mainly in the 60s, 70s, without little influence. And the real right-wing extremists were now organized in different parties. However, the scholars, me included, we object that this new decision, this new line of the Federal Constitutional Court in Germany makes the instrument of prohibiting political parties almost inoperable. That means it becomes almost impossible to prohibit a political party. For that reason, ladies and gentlemen, I would not recommend to follow this second decision of the German Federal Constitutional Court. It has been widely criticized. But you see, we are aware of the risk that the measures to defend democracy could also be abused to fight against democracy itself, to stop a rivaling political party. Well, in reaction to this decision of 2017, the basic law was amended. You know, in Germany, it's rather easy to demand the constitution. It's not as difficult as in Indonesia. You just need to have a 2/3 majority in the German Bundestag, the parliament, and in the Federal Council. And so they amended the constitution and introduced that now, even if such a party is not prohibited, it can at least be excluded from public party funding. Public party funding, that means that, and it's a German system, political parties get a part of their finances, depending on their success in the elections, from the state. They get money for every vote which they achieve in an election. So if a political party is unconstitutional, but cannot be prohibited because it's not strong enough, at least it shall be excluded from public party funding. Also only by the Federal Constitutional Court. By the way, who can apply for that? It's the German Bundestag, the Federal Council, the federal government, or if the party is limited to a land, also a land government. At the moment, there is a case pending against that right-wing extremist party NPD, but the application has already been filed in 2019, and we are still waiting for the decision. That's a long time. That's a problem in Europe. Court decisions can take long time. So we think that now this right-wing extremist party will at least be excluded from state funding. The next step will be the prohibition of associations, clubs, any kind of associations whose aims or activities are directed against the free and democratic constitutional order. Only, again, if this aim is pursued in an actively militant, aggressive way. So also these associations, that can be a club, any kind of club, or even an informal association, must fighting actively. It's not enough that they just talk nonsense. And in this case, the decision is taken not by the Constitutional Court, but by the Federal Ministry of the Interior and Community. That means the Ministry of the Interior. They prohibit nationwide trans-regional associations, or the land authorities, they can prohibit local or regional associations who are fighting against the constitutional order. Usually this is combined with the seizure and confiscation of the association's assets. So all the property of the association is confiscated. The money is taken away. The bank accounts are confiscated. The Federal Ministry of the Interior banned, I have seen statistics, between 1964 and 2021, 20 right-wing groups, 1 left-wing extremist group, and 15 Islamist groups. You know, we have also Islamist extremists like ISIS, which is quite strong in Germany, who are fighting against democracy. That is not so much, but at least there is a little bit happening. This instrument is not controversial at all, but it is not so effective since the extremists can easily regroup. Of course, it is prohibited for them to regroup, to make a replacement organization, but it's quite difficult to prove that if they regroup. And nowadays, anyway, the extremists tend not to organize in larger organizations anymore. By the way, this applies to the Islamists in Germany and to the right-wing extremists like the Islamophobic, the racists, the fascists. And it's interesting, the right-wing extremist groups have learned a lot from the new tactics and strategies of the Islamist groups. They are simply copying and pasting them. You would not have one big organization like ISIS or like you had FPI in Indonesia, because this would be easy to prohibit. Now they organize in small networks, and that is decentralized. So it's very, very difficult to identify clearly an organization which you could then prohibit. That makes this Prohibition of Associations instrument not so effective. On the other hand, ladies and gentlemen, it has an advantage. If the extremists are organized not in one powerful organization, but in a network, they will have less power. That applies in particular to the right-wing extremist groups who follow the Führer principle, the authority of the leader principle, like under Adolf Hitler. In a network, in a decentralized structure, you cannot have one big leader. So it has also the effect that the right-wing extremists are not so powerful strategically or in the strikes, what they can do. The next element, you know, in Indonesia too, the loyalty to the constitution and the willingness to defend it as basic requirements for civil servants. This has been confirmed by the Federal Constitutional Court in a famous decision as one of the so-called traditional principles of professional civil service under Article 33, Section 5 of the Basic Law. This article says that these traditional principles of professional civil service must prevail, they must be implemented in the laws. And one of these principles is the requirement that every civil servant, policeman, soldier, any judge too, anyone who works for the state, the lecturers at the state university too, by the way, need to be loyal to the Constitution. They must offer the guarantee that they will stand up at all times to fight against any attack on the free and democratic basic order. If this is not guaranteed, they cannot become a civil servant, or if they are already, they will be dismissed. Active supporters of extremist ideologies who fight against democracy, they are denied access to the civil service. They can not become a judge, not become a policeman, not become a soldier, not become a teacher, not become any kind of civil service, and not become a lecturer at the state university. Or if they are already, they are excluded in a special procedure controlled by the courts from the civil service. This often relates to teachers who in the past had often been left-wing extremists, communists in Germany, professors also, police officers and soldiers that are often right-wing extremists. But it does not only affect the traditional communist fascists, it also affects Islamists. So an Islamist who thinks that the will of God or that the Sharia stands above democracy and above the law, that Islamist cannot become or stay a civil servant, cannot be a lecturer, cannot be a teacher, or not be a policeman, soldier, and so on. But also we have now new kinds of extremists which fight against the state with very diffuse, crazy ideologies. We have the so-called Reichsbürger. These are people who say they're citizens of the old empire, who pretend that Germany as a modern state does not exist, and that still the monarchical constitution of the old empire before the First World War is enforced. We also have the so-called Selbstverwalter, self-administrator, extremists, which say that they can simply put a sign on their property, real estate property, and define themselves outside of the jurisdiction of the state. And in the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been evolving esoteric extremists, anti-vaxxers, and the so-called Querdenker. These are corona skeptics who follow conspiracy theories, like in the US, and who are fighting against any measures of the state. As you may have read already in the news, in all Western countries at the moment, we have the phenomenon of all kinds of crazy extremist groups, in particular during the COVID-19 pandemic. I can tell you, a year ago, at the end of the year, 2021-2, I have gone with my wife to Germany to see my family. It was such a crazy situation. In almost every family, you had some people who say COVID does not exist, it's all a lie, and the vaccination is a dirty trick of Bill Gates, who wants to implement us chips to control our brain, things like that. And even couples have divorced, families have exploded, groups of friends have dissolved because of this crazy thinking. It's a clear sign also of a crisis of democracy, what we have. I was last year happy when I could come back to Indonesia. I needed to go 1 week to quarantine in Jakarta in a hotel where I was in prison practically, but I was still happy because I was back in a more rational environment. So all these kinds of extremists, they are also active in the civil service. We have policemen who follow the conspiracy theories of QAnon in the US. We have teachers who follow FBI or ISIS, or esoteric anti-vaxxers. They all can be dismissed from the civil service. The conditions in detail, how strong are the requirements before the state will dismiss a civil servant, they are controversial and always have been controversial. The practice to use this instrument has changed significantly over time. In the 1970s and 80s, when there were many communist teachers supporting the Soviet Union and the communist regime in Eastern Germany, many young teachers who had studied were denied access to work for the state. I would say, from my personal judgment, that I think that the practice in Germany has been a little bit biased. It focused too strongly on the left-wing extremists, but often neglected to focus on the right-wing extremists. That seems to be changing at the moment, but still I would say the reaction of the state against extremism is a little bit biased. It's a tradition in many countries that right-wing extremism, for example, racism, nationalism, fascism, Islamophobism, that this is a little bit neglected, that they think, that is not so important, it's not so dangerous, or they simply don't want to see that. That is a problem. So we need to be careful. If you require loyalty to the Constitution and willingness to defend it as a basic requirement to be a civil servant, you must apply that instrument equally against all kinds of extremism. All kinds of are fighting against democracy. The next instrument is the declaration of forfeiture of certain fundamental rights. That's also interesting. Whoever abuses the freedom to express his opinion of the press, the freedom of academic teaching, applies also to lecturers, the freedom of assembly or the freedom of association or some other fundamental rights, can forfeit these rights. That means he can be temporarily, only for some years, banned from enjoying these rights. It is the Federal Constitutional Court who will decide about that with a 2/3 majority on application of the German Bundestag, the parliament, the federal government, or a land government. This instrument is interesting because the Federal Constitutional Court has a wide range of measures. It may also deny the right to this person to vote and to stand for election. And the Constitutional Court may also deprive that person from the right to hold any public office during the time of the forfeiture. That would be at least 1 year, maybe some years more. Interesting, this instrument has never been used in practice. It would have been easy to use it. Of course, against any fascist or Islamist or Stalinist, you could use that. But the German Bundestag, the federal government, and the land governments have been careful. They have been moderate. They have said the risk that this instrument is abused because somebody simply criticizes the government, that risk is too high. However, even if this instrument has never been applied in practice, ladies and gentlemen, it is a reserve weapon for future battles to preserve democracy. For that reason, this Article 18 of our Constitution has not been deleted, and I would recommend also to insert such a clause in the constitutions of other countries. However, careful, it must be clear that only the Constitutional Court can decide that, and there needs to be a high threshold, a 2/3 majority at least, maybe better a 3/4 majority, because the risk of abuse of this instrument is extremely high. I may just remind you that during the pandemic, there were attempts to stop critics of the Indonesian president by prohibiting demonstrations in Jakarta, pretending that the pandemic would not allow that. But in reality, and you could see, even the police was taking action against bloggers who were criticizing the president. You could see that there is always a high temptation of state institutions to make quiet those who criticize them. The next instrument is the forced transfer or retirement of judges who violate the principles of the basic law or the constitutional order of the land. This also can only be done by the Federal Constitutional Court and only on impeachment by the German Bundestag. And only if core principles of the Constitution, as you study them in your course, if they are violated. So not if any principle under the Constitution is violated, but core principles that would be commitment to human rights, rule of law, democracy, human dignity, social justice, and coherence in Germany. The principles of the free and democratic constitutional order. In Indonesia, it would be the principles of the Pancasila doctrine. It is disputed if the judges also must show a militant aggressive attitude. It's clear that the violation of these core principles must be intentional, of course. So a judge may also violate the Constitution because he misunderstands it. That is not covered by that. But does the judge need to have a militant aggressive attitude? That's not so clear because, again, this instrument has not yet been used in practice. Currently, However, it is discussed in the case of a right-wing extremist judge in Saxony. If you have a look on the course material, the lecture material which I distributed and which you can download from my website, there is a link and you can read about that story. It's still discussed. It's a right-wing extremist and Islamophobic. That's really, we have this problem now. Islamophobia as a hate against Muslims, as a new kind of racism. And he was a member of parliament and has given a lot of speeches with racist content. And now he wants to become work as a judge again. It's not yet sure what will happen. The next instrument you have too in Indonesia, the impeachment of the president for intentional violation of the constitution. This instrument, however, would be in the center of the course in Indonesia, because in the presidential governing system, that would be the most important instrument to protect democracy. So in the US, in Indonesia, in Brazil, in Korea, that's quite important. Not in Germany. Germany is a parliamentary governing system, and there the federal president does not have much power. We call them the state notary. He publishes the law and puts a stamp on that, and that's it. And he can give some nice speeches on this holiday, but that's it. So there, it has not been used in practice, that instrument again. It's not political. It's a purely legal procedure, would be comparable to a criminal procedure. The next aspect might be more interesting for Indonesia. The defense of the constitution by specialized domestic intelligence services, a secret service for the protection of the constitution. We have a German domestic intelligence community for the protection of the constitution, the Verfassungsschutz, with the mission to collect, to analyze, to evaluate, and to report information about all kinds of anti-constitutional endeavors, of attempts to fight the constitution. This domestic intelligence community consists of a Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution. This is a secret service, but you cannot compare it to the FBI, which is more specialized in criminal prosecution, such an institution we have too. And you cannot compare that to the CIA in America, which would be for foreign affairs. This is a special secret service which infiltrates, which supervises, which observes very carefully extremist groups. So you may understand that this is quite sensitive. These agencies may use intelligence means. They use informants, confidential informants. That means they bribe members of the extremist groups. They use undercover agents like in a James Bond movie. They use the instrument of observation, also technical observation, with cameras, with secret microphones, with everything like in a James Bond movie. Visual and audio surveillance. But the Office for the Protection of the Constitution in the Federation, and also those in the Länders, they do not have police powers. They cannot take any binding decisions against the citizen. They cannot arrest, for example, the citizen. And they do not have the authority to issue any instructions to any other authorities. So they just collect information. This collected intelligence is presented to the policymakers in the parliaments, land parliaments and federal parliaments, and also to authorize authorities. The information collected by these secret services is used for the purposes of the other instruments of defense of democracy. In particular, for prohibiting a political party, or preparing for that, and for prohibiting associations who fight against democracy, we need the information of these secret services. So it's quite interesting and a very controversial institution. The left-wing extremists, they don't like that at all, but they don't have any decision-making powers. They only collect the information. Once a year, they publish an annual report on the protection of the Constitution. Once a year, they write which groups are dangerous. That's published. So everybody can read it, and which parties are dangerous, which parties they are observing. So they say that, they need to say that, and every citizen can inform himself or herself about the threats to democracy. All of these agencies are submitted to comprehensive administrative and also parliamentary oversight. They are controlled by the superiors, by the government, and also by the parliament. And they are also submitted to judicial control. If you become a victim of an observation measure, you can file a complaint before the administrative court. They are not standing outside of the law. Of course, they are controlled by the courts. Anyway, they are quite controversial. For a long time, civil society organizations in Germany have reproached the Verfassungsschutz for being blind in the right eye. And I think I would support that. They have been very tough on infiltrating and observation measures against left-wing extremists and also against Islamists, but they tended to be more tolerant, more negligent with the right-wing extremists. Moreover, a real big problem, Hans-Georg Maaßen, a former president of the federal office, the last one, and a prominent member of the Christian Democratic Union, the party of Angela Merkel. He has turned out to be a right-wing extremist himself. Now his successor, who was the vice president of the federal office in the past, he is preparing to take observation measures against him. So what is this if a right-wing radical can be the head of the Office for Protection of the Constitution? Of course, then it will not work correctly. Since this man has left, the Constitutional Protection Agency works much better, and is not so biased anymore. So, ladies and gentlemen, you see that the measures for the defense of democracy are not easy. We need that, but it's also dangerous, both. Now I come to something which is more easy. So that is a very simple but effective trick. You know that disinformation campaigns, fake news, spreading of fake news, plays an important role in the fight against democracy. For example, Russian propaganda at the moment is very successful, even in manipulating elections in the US. So the German constitution has one precaution. In Germany, the freedom to express one's opinions, the freedom of opinion, we call that, it relates to opinions. That means value judgments. Statements of facts are protected too, but only because and insofar as they are a prerequisite, a condition for the formation of opinions. untrue, that means proven false or deliberately untrue allegations of fact cannot contribute to a constructive opinion-making process, decision-making process in a democracy. Therefore, according to the well-established jurisprudence of the Federal Constitutional Court, untrue allegations of facts, that means fake news, do not fall under the freedom of opinion. They are not protected at all. So if you lie or if you just forward fake news, you can be punished. The authorities may close down your website or take sanctions. You cannot say that I am just exercising my freedom of opinion. But this is only about allegations of facts. If you say, for example, all Muslims eat little children, they are sacrificing them, that would be a clear lie. Then the authorities can intervene against you, and that would not even be an encroachment, a restriction on your freedom of opinion. But if you say, for example, all Muslims are bad, I don't like Muslims, that would still be a value judgment, a personal judgment, and the authorities cannot do anything as long as it does not turn into hate speech. But that means that the lawyers must very carefully distinguish between a personal opinion, a subjective value judgment, and allegations of facts. Because allegations of facts, whenever you report any facts, they must be true. If not, it can be easily prohibited. This is different from America, ladies and gentlemen. You know that in America you can spread all lies and they think this is covered by the freedom of opinion. We have a right to lie in Germany too, yes, but only under another fundamental right, that is the general freedom of action, the right to do everything what you want. And this right can be easily restricted. There is no problem to restrict it in pursuit of any public interest or whenever protecting the rights of others. So this general freedom of action is just a right which practically obliges authorities to justify if they take action against you, but it can be easily restricted. So in the political discussion, in particular, if the lie can cause unrest in the society, this general freedom of action does not help. And what is important, fake news do not fall under the freedom of opinion. I think that this is a good solution. It makes it much easier for the authorities to intervene. So that's why, for example, right-wing extremist Islamophobic websites can be quite easily closed in Germany, or QAnon websites can be closed in Germany, while they can be still active in the US. The Americans do not like that. They think that our definition of freedom of expression, freedom of the expression of your opinion, is too narrow. Now I come to my last topic, a special fundamental right to resist, a constitutional right of the citizen to resist against any attempt to abolish the free and democratic basic order. Anchored in Article 20, Section 4. Ladies and gentlemen, when you look at my materials, I think now you can see my materials. On the last page, page 4, I have copied these clauses of the German Constitution. You can see them now, right? So you can read that. Article 24, all Germans shall have the right to resist any person seeking to abolish this constitutional order, if no other remedy is available. That is the reaction to the missing resistance of the German citizens against the tyranny of the National Socialists. Ladies and gentlemen, You know that the generation of my parents and grandparents, they have done nothing to stop the Holocaust, nothing to stop Adolf Hitler and the crimes of the National Socialists. And we still are angry about that. We always have criticized them. We did not have much respect for the whole generation of my parents and grandparents because they allowed something like Adolf Hitler to develop. And this should never happen again. Therefore, in 1949, those who made the new constitution, many of them had been persecuted under the National Socialist rules or needed to emigrate and came back. They incorporated a right to resistance. It's a human right, a fundamental right of the citizen under the Constitution. And, ladies and gentlemen, it includes the right to violence. This may include the right to kill the president or the chancellor. So, or to bomb the government. This is not harmless. But what is the problem? Only if no other remedy is available. You see, that's what Article 20, Section 4 says quite explicitly. That means no legal remedies to the courts, no remedies to the federal constitutional courts anymore, no remedies to public authorities, which may help you. Only if all these other possibilities are not available anymore are you allowed to use the right to resist. What does that mean? For most citizens, this will be a purely theoretical option. Because if these other remedies are not available, what do you want to do? As a lecturer or student, how do you want to stop a coup d'etat if it's going on, for example? And the judges of the Federal Constitutional Court have already been arrested and other judges dismissed, or they are running away from the country because they're prosecuted. How do you want them to resist? Ladies and gentlemen, for that reason, this is mainly a symbol. But one difference. In my last university in Germany, I taught police officers. It was the federal government University of Public Administration. And the students in my classes were federal police officers which wanted to move on in their career and therefore needed a university degree. And these federal police officers, they also are used to protect the government when there are meetings of the government, when there are open events where ministers talk or the government talks, the chancellor talks. They are going with them in the airplanes, for example. So, and some of my students at that last university, they had already been active in protecting the government as guards, for example, bodyguards. So these students, they listened very, very carefully. In particular, when I taught them, the fundamental right to resist includes the right to violence if there is no other remedy anymore. These students at my last university, some of them, they might be the one who might be able to kill the minister or the federal chancellor who tries to turn the democratic system into an authoritarian system. That is quite interesting. So once in my life, I have been teaching a group of students for whom this right to resist is really relevant. Well, ladies and gentlemen, but anyway, that is a strong sign to make sure that this constitution, our basic law of 1949, will not give up easily if democracy is attacked. Let me come to my conclusion. I presented you a rich set of precautions and instruments that need to be used, but not abused. They need to be used prudently, moderately, but consistently and without bias against all kinds of extremism which really constitute a threat to democracy. This is a difficult tightrope, not easy to handle. There is an important role of judicial control. The courts need to check the legality of all these measures to make sure that these measures do not serve authoritarianism themselves. But we also need the control by the public in the democratic process. For example, the work of the Verfassungsschutz, the officers for the protection of the constitution, is highly debated. And there are lots of journalists who are analyzing what are these secret services doing. That is important too. Allow me one outlook. There is a need to further develop the concept of the defensive democracy. Because now, in the era of digitalization, there are new threats to democracy. New threats like fake news, hate speech, well-organized digital disinformation campaigns, cyberbullying, manipulation of public discourses by social bots, and so on. A manipulation of the internet. It's a quite horror story what is going on now, but this is a different topic. I have given a lecture on that also already. You can click on that link and read that. What we see is in the times of digitalization, in particular with social media and in the future artificial intelligence, we need to develop that concept. What I have presented you is not enough for the future. Must be adapted, but that's a different topic. And there is already an international discourse on how to develop the concept of defensive democracy. Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. That was my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Thomas?
Yes.
My sound is good enough to be here.
Yes,
yes, thank you very much. This is a very interesting topics actually, but maybe for the class, maybe a little bit difficult to understand because they are still in the second semester. Yes. So, but I still hope that you understand there is a lot of problems in democracy, not only in Indonesia, but also in Germany. So we are, all people in the world is trying to make democracy stronger, but not only by defend the democracy, but actually maybe in Indonesia we need to have a meaningful democracy, because sometimes in Indonesia we're facing that all legislation has been passed and then the lawmakers not using the proper way to pass the law, which is using the meaningful participation from the people in the legislation process. However, a lot of issues that you will need to explore more, and the resources are available. Professor Thomas, thank you very much for giving us all of the link in your paper. This is a very honor material. It's very rich material for us. And I will open a question and answer session for all the class. If you have a question, please move forward, and then the lecturer will give you the opportunity to give the question directly to the Professor Thomas. Please, maybe the class in C403, D304, E301, and D407. Please, is there any question? Yeah. Okay, I have two questions. Yeah, in D407, please come forward. Maju aja.
Terima kasih.
I will give the opportunity first for the room D7 ya. Silakan Mbak. Langsung aja. Di sini aja nih kelihatan kok. Nah, Kelihatan nggak sih kamu? Ya udah.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity. First of all, my name is Alicia, and I want to ask a question from your critics about the democracy in Germany. As for
Professor Thomas, can you hear it? The question? Okay.
Is there any country that has a really good and effective democracy system that can be a good role model for other democratic countries, or there's no other country with a perfect democracy at all? Thank you.
Good question. Thank you very much. What's your name?
Alicia.
Alicia, thank you, Alicia. Next question from D407. Please come forward.
Hello, Professor Thomas. Can you hear my voice? Okay. My name is Pinky from class E313. Thank you so much for the opportunity. First of all, I really want to thank you for giving an incredible material about defensive democracy, and I do really appreciate Professor so much. So alright, back for the question. For the section of the individual precautions and instruments to defend democracy, there is a point about prohibition of associations who aims for activities are directed against for constitutional order. And inside that section, professors say that the FMI, or Federal Ministry of the Interior and Community Organ Authorities, ban several groups. And one of them are the 15 Islamic groups. And my question is, what kind of the characteristic or specific criteria that can be banned by the FMI, since I am living in Indonesia with the majority of Islam, and Islam is a religion of peace, but for sure there's a several group of Muslims that actually divide out there. Thank you so much, Professor.
Excuse me, may I ask you to repeat the question? It was not all acoustically clear. Because there is hall in the rooms.
Sorry, for students in ruangan E301, you may go to in front of the camera. There is an inbuilt microphone. You can use that microphone rather than the. Please turn off your microphone in hand and use the inbuilt microphone in camera.
Okay, Professor, sebelumnya can you hear my voice?
Yeah, now it's better, yes.
Okay. Okay, so I want to repeat the question. Hello, Professor Thomas. My name is Pinky, and thank you so much for the opportunity. First of all, I really want to thank you for giving an incredible material about defensive democracy, and I do really appreciate so much. And for the back to the question is, for this section of the individual precautions and instruments to defend democracy, there's a point about prohibition of associations whose aims or activities are directed against the constitutional order. And then inside that section, professors said that the FMI, or the Federal Ministry of the Interior and Community or Land Authorities, ban several groups. And one of them is the 15 Islamic groups that we banned. And my question is, what kind of the characteristic or specific criteria that can be banned by the FMI, since I am living in Indonesia, and Indonesia majority religion is Muslim, so I know that Muslim is a peace religion, but for sure there's a several group of Muslim that actually divide out there. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you. So Professor Thomas, I think there is more than 5 questions. Will we collect all of them? Or maybe we can separate it into 2 sessions?
I only Okay, you may need to repeat some. I will start with the last one concerning the prohibition of Islamist groups who are fighting against the democratic order. This is indeed a problem in Germany and all Europe. This is not Muslim groups. This is a Muslim extremist groups. And we have some groups, mainly it's some kind of extremist Salafists or Wahhabists, where the imams, for example, or the organization says quite clearly that Muslims must not follow democracy. So, and they see quite clearly democracy is the rule of evil, and that the Sharia stays above the democracy. And they say, for example, that the Muslims must not follow the laws of Germany if they are not in line with the Sharia. That is, or others say, for example, that they cannot respect, they cannot have respect for women's rights, because the woman must not be free. So the woman must follow the orders of her husband or of her family. And these groups, if they are fighting militantly, for example, they are making violent demonstrations. Some of them are, for example, putting bombs. We have that. These are prohibited. So the main reason is that there are some Muslim communities where mainly the imams, they preach often that the state in Europe, the democracy and rule of law is evil, and that a good Muslim is not allowed to follow these rules, but instead must follow the Islamic rules. For example, a problem is they cannot respect human rights. When there is, for example, a Muslim girl in the family who does not want to wear the hijab, she has the right. In Germany, you have religious maturity with 14 years. That means a girl who is 14 years old, she can say, I will leave Islam, or I will not wear a hijab, and the family must respect that decision. That is, for example, a problem. And then these organizations are encouraging the families to put the girl under pressure, even with violence, or in some cases even to kill, for example, a Muslim girl who has a boyfriend who is not Muslim, or if she has sex with a boyfriend without being married. So these are extremist groups, mainly extremist currents of Salafism and Wahhabism and Islamic State. The other question, which countries, if I have understood it right, it was not acoustically all clear, which other countries are following the concept of defensive democracy? I would say almost all countries in the European Union, but in a different in a different matter. So many countries, I would say most countries in the European Union are applying some of these measures. For example, most countries know the instrument of prohibition of political parties and of the prohibition of associations. Most countries know that. Also, a lot of countries in the European Union know that instrument of making the loyalty to the constitution a requirement for being the civil servant. There are some instruments, however, which also not have been used in Germany, like the forfeiture of certain fundamental rights. I do not know any countries which are using that. Some instrument against, like the impeachment of the president for intentional violation of the constitution, that you have in practically every democratic country. Also, most European countries, but not all, have special services to protect the constitution. But it's not always separated special services. It can also be a special unit within the national police. That can also be. Well, does this answer your question?
Okay. Thank you very much.
What are the other questions? So maybe some I did not understand. What question could you please repeat, which I have not yet answered?
You already answered all the questions.
Okay.
But there will be more than 5 questions in this session, so I will give the opportunity for the room B304 and room C403. D304 sama C403. Silakan satu-satu dulu ya untuk bertanya. Silakan. D304 dibuka mic-nya. Silakan. Satu-satu dulu biar dapat semuanya.
Nyalain mic-nya. Nyalain.
Nggak usah dinyalain.
Aku pakai mic. Ini speaker-nya dulu. Dengeran. Halo.
Berdiri mengarah kamera aja. D304, silakan berdiri mengarah kamera.
So, okay. Am I audible, sir? Dengeran nggak?
Mengarah kamera aja, Mas. Aman, Mas. Mengarah kamera. Jangan ini screen-nya. Mukanya nyamping jadinya.
Ya, silakan.
Alright. Well, guten Morgen, Professor Thomas Schmitz. My name is Fawaz. So first of all, thank you for your comprehensive explanation. So I do have some questions regarding your explanation. So my first question is, the rise of right-wing populist parties in Germany, such as Alternative for Germany or AfD, has sparked concerns about the country's democracy. So how has the AfD's rhetoric and actions challenged the foundation of German democracy, and what measures have been taken to address these challenges? And then the second question is, Germany, as we know, has been a leader in Europe in terms of its response to the refugee crisis. So, however, the influx of refugees has also raised questions about the country's ability to maintain its democratic values. So my question is, how has Germany's approach to refugee integration affected its democracy, and what lessons can be learned from its experience? Thank you.
Thank you. Now next, C403. Silakan.
Satu lagi. D304 atau C4?
C403. Satu-satu dulu. Semua ruangan.
Oh,
C403.
Good morning, Professor Thomas.
Dengeran. Dari sini. Udah, menghadap sana ya.
Dengeran jelas.
Kamu aja, Fran.
Good morning, Professor Thomas. So I have some questions that I would ask you. So after listening to your lectures, I've seen that most of the measures you were describing were of the legal or the national administrative kind. So I would ask if, like, because I've seen these happenings that usually the rise of right-wing nationalists or right-wing radicalists are not just because the law or the lack of administrative measures taken against it, but also from the popular perceptions. So are there any, like, what do you say? Like the government in Germany, what do you say? Like giving awareness to the population, because I've seen in the cases, like, for example, the National Socialists, it's not about only the flaws of the Constitution, but also the ones of the people. Are there measures taken by the government to make the people aware that, hey, democracy shall never be taken for granted? We have to defend it, not only from the legislative or the secret services, but the awareness from the people themselves. Are there measures taken to increase the people's awareness of this issue? Because I've seen since 2012, these issues are rising in Europe, for example, in Italy and some other places, which has increasing right-wing leniencies. Thank you.
Very much. Professor Thomas?
Thank you. These were two very interesting questions. They are a little bit connected. First, I will answer to the question from room D304 about the rise of right-wing extremism, in particular the Islamophobic and racist party AfD. Are there measures taken against that? As I told you, the work of the Verfassungsschutz, the officers to protect the constitutional order, has been a little bit biased. And I would say not only on the federal level, even on the land level. So these agencies, which should serve to protect the Constitution, have been reluctant in reacting to the threat by the new right-wing populist party, which is not totally fascist, but it's partially fascist. That party also presented itself for a long time as democratic, and there is maybe one wing of the party which is right-wing, but still democratic, but the majority of this party, I would say, is clearly fighting against the democratic constitutional order. Nowadays, in many landers, and also the federal office of for the protection of the Constitution, have started to observe this party. There is a 3 steps escalation model. First, they have announced publicly that they had the suspicion that this party was under suspicion. Then later, they have announced that in some of the German landers and also the youth group of this party, they are observing. That means they take more serious measures. So we can say this party is now under observation. Observing also means that the Secret Service infiltrates the party with undercover agents. So that's quite serious. But so we can see that the party is under observation. However, from my personal perspective, this is by far not enough. I think still that the threat is rather downplayed. So it's a big discussion in the population if this is enough what they are doing. We may see the prohibition of this party, or at least in some landers, but it's not yet totally clear because this right-wing extremist party has been turned more and more to the right. I think that within the next 2-3 years, we may see attempts to prohibit this political party. But this party is not the most aggressive racist or Islamophobic parties. There are more parties which are not represented in the parliament. This party, AfD, is very dangerous because it is represented in the parliament. In some landers, mainly in East Germany, that means landers which have been under communist rule, which have been part of the East German Republic for 40 years, the people are not that much used to live together with foreigners as in West Germany. So we can see a very clear distinction that racism Islamophobism, nationalism is much stronger in the east of Germany and the west. I would not exclude for the future that Germany may fall apart again, because we see also a quite big alienation between West Germans and East Germans. And also in East Germany, there have been, in some, and in particular in Saxony, the area of Dresden, which was the most remote area in Eastern Germany, there have been strong developments of QAnon and esoterian and corona skeptic extremism. There, I would clearly say that the local government, the land government of Saxony, they don't take the threat seriously enough. So it's a very serious threat, but as some students said already, we have the same development in all European countries. Look at Italy, where the fascist party has come to power. Look at France, where there's always the risk of the fascists coming to power. So we have strong fascists also in the Netherlands now, in Spain. In many, many countries, this is a very huge problem. And I may say in this context, it may be that democracy will not survive in Europe. I'm not totally sure. In that case, it's important that countries like Indonesia, they study that, they learn about all that, because it may be then later be the task of these countries to bring democracy back to Europe. That can happen. That can happen. So Europe is the center of the free and democratic constitutionalism, but it may be that that whole concept goes down now. We see the big danger in the USA, where it's not yet clear if there will not be a civil war coming in the next year. Now, the second question was asked about the refugee reflux and the integration of refugees. I don't think that the high number of refugees is the main problem. This is not the reason why the right-wing extremism developed. The reason for the development, the rise of right-wing extremism, is more the neoliberal economic order and globalism, globalization, which has made many citizens in all countries to winners, but many citizens also to losers. So we see a very clear polarization, and it's, oh, I don't see my picture anymore. Can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear your voice, but the picture is...
I don't know what is going wrong there.
Maybe the connection, but the sound is clear.
I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. I have a problem with my camera. I don't know what that is, but I will talk. I will go on talking. I'm sorry. You can hear me, right?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
But I don't know what that is. Okay. So I think that the reflux of refugees is not really the reason for the problems. Concerning the refugees, many have been integrated quite well in the European societies, also in Germany. For example, we had more than 1,500,000 refugees from Syria coming to Germany in 2015. Many of them, if not even most of them, have been integrated well. I also know some of them. And the same now with 1 million Ukrainian refugees. Many are integrated well. The problem is rather that in a formally more or less homogeneous society, you get more cultural diversity. And we see that in times of globalization, that is a problem. So some of the citizens, in particular, local citizens on the countryside, they have problems to accept that the society is pluralistic. But it's basically the same problem which you have in Indonesia. When you have Indonesians who say Indonesia will never become a pluralistic country. But sorry, in times of globalization, where you have a big movement of people moving in different countries, you have different religions, different cultures, different ways of life in every country. So, and the right-wing populists are often those who are not able or not willing to adapt to that situation. And that is more, I would say, a sociological problem for which a solution must be found. Now I come to the question from room C403. A little bit of that I have already answered, but the question was, what measures does the government or do the governments take to make people aware of the necessity to defend democracy? Ladies and gentlemen, the governments take measures. Yes, they inform. There is a lot of public relations, information campaigns of the governments, of the land governments and of the federal government against all threats of democracy. There are also special commissioners of the government for refugees' rights, against racism, for rights of minorities. They are all quite active. However, from my perspective, I have the impression that they are still talking within a running, functioning democracy. They say what we need in a democracy, and they say that there needs to be pluralism and tolerance in the democracy, and they say that we need to be careful of these extremists who think that they are talking for the people, but in reality want to establish just some kind of authoritarian leadership system. But I think that the German federal government and also the most land government do not take that problem seriously enough, not yet. They are sometimes talking about the necessity to defend democracy, but not very clearly. They are not addressing the people clearly and saying, we are in an emergency situation. Our democracy is under fire. This is done by some politicians, often by politicians from the opposition parties, and this is done by the civil society organizations and by journalists. But so far, there has not been an appeal of any government, land government or the federal government, that now we have this time where we need to defend democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, we see that is a general development that once authoritarian populist groups come who pretend that they are presenting the will of the people, who talk in a stupid way, but which is attractive for simple minds, and who may even be successful in elections, that the governments, often the democratic governments, do not really want to see the scope of the problems. They see the problem, but not the dimension of the problem. For that reason, I'm a little bit more pessimistic, and I think that it would be necessary to make clear that we are in a situation where we need to defend democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, in the US, it's very clear now. There has already been the coup d'etat, the attempt of coup d'etat of Donald Trump, and the Republicans may start a second one. So, but even in the US, it's rather rare that people, the governments openly say, we need to defend our democracy or it will perish. Maybe the topic is not taken seriously enough. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think I need to re-enter into the Zoom meeting. I cannot start the video connection anymore.
Okay, so actually we only have left 15 minutes more. So Yeah, we're sorry that maybe for all of you, sorry.
No, I will come back. I will just leave for a moment and re-enter the Zoom meeting. That's okay.
Okay.
Just some minutes.
No problem. We will wait 1 minute. Thank you. Kita tinggal 15 menit lagi. Pada masih mau nanya nggak? Boleh ya? Boleh nggak sih? Mau nanya lagi?
Bayu, mohon izin satu lagi dikasih. Boleh nggak?
Iya, di sini juga ada satu. Kayaknya di setiap kelas ada satu deh. Cuman nanti kalian keluarnya pada ada kuliah nggak? Takutnya mepet.
Ada kuliah.
Ada hukum Islam.
Ada hukum Islam. Gimana?
Jam berapa hukum Islam kan memang kuliah HTN sampai 10:30.
Ya, tapi setiap ruangan ada satu pertanyaan. Ini nggak cukup nanti dijawabnya.
Oh, gitu. Yes, we can already see you again.
Back again.
Prof. Thomas, welcome back. Hello, Prof. Thomas, welcome back. Now we can see you. Yay.
I'm sorry for that technical problem. That is a Zoom problem, but
no problem. It happened many times in COVID area. Yes. So, however, class, you shocked me because your question is all out of my mind, because I think this material will be difficult for you, but you all have a very great question. However, our is very limited. We only have last 13 minutes. So I am very sorry for the rest of the question that might not be able to deliver in this session. Maybe we will have another session in the future, maybe Prof. Thomas. But before we close this class, I will give for Prof. Thomas to give a closing statement for all of us. Maybe for Prof. Thomas, you may give a closing statement for all of the students from the University of Indonesia.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the possibility to talk about that topic here. Defense of democracy, first of all, is a problem of the society. So more important than these legal measures, which I have reported here, which are really quite serious, is always the awareness of the individual citizen, and also the activities of the civil society organization, political parties, groups, human rights groups, also women's rights groups, all kinds of groups of societies, and also the responsibility of the media to defend democracy. We see that this is the most important effect. All these legal measures, which I have introduced here, presented, they only work if they are taken in an emergency situation. And I am not so sure if they will really be taken if in some countries like in Germany or France or Italy or the Netherlands, the democratic system really comes under serious pressure. Maybe then the parliaments or the governments are not strong enough anymore to take these measures. So awareness is very important. And also the activities of the students. Ladies and gentlemen, do not simply follow political leaders. Think critically and be active. Use your right to demonstration. That is your constitutional right. Do not accept if there are any attempts to limit that. I see with this background, the new criminal code a little bit critical with this clause, which makes it difficult to criticize the president anymore. That new clause in the criminal code may bring problems. But it's very important to see how that clause will be practiced. So you need to be aware and you need to be active. The society must not be sleepy. These measures, which I have mentioned here, they are effective, but they also bear the risk of abuse. So, for example, in countries like Turkey, they say that President Erdogan says he defends democracy against terrorists, but in reality, he is fighting against democracy. So this is just the legal measures which are possible under the Constitution. I hope it was not too difficult for you, for the students, for first-year students. It's not so easy. I would like to invite you to study the links in my paper if you are more interested. Also, dear students, you do not need to be shy. If anybody of you has more questions, you can always contact me via email or via WhatsApp and ask questions. My email address is in the footnote 1 of my paper. No problem, you're always welcome. But thank you very much. I'm, to close with that, I am quite optimistic that democracy in Indonesia will be strong in the future. I see that, and I see there are steps to limit democracy, but there is also immediately resistance in that. The civil society in Indonesia is quite active. Also, it's of course the job of the lecturers. So, but we have at UGM many lecturers, and I think at UI it will be the same, who are standing up when they see that any problem could arise with new measures which may limit, for example, the democratic freedoms. Okay, thank you very much for your attention and hope to see you again.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thomas. Give applause for Professor Thomas Schmitz. We are honored to have you in a Zoom meeting online lecture in the Faculty of University of Indonesia. We hope in the future you can come to University of Indonesia and we have an offline lecture in Depok. I think this is the end of this class. I will give back to Bapak Minani Abioso for the most important session, which is take picture. No. The most important one. Thank you very much. I give you back to, thank you very much, Prof. Thomas. And then I will give the session back to Pak Minani. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Dr. Puratayuni and Professor Thomas for this session. So, like Bu Puratayuni, this is the most important session. Students, please move to the camera. To move forward to the camera, please. I will take a screenshot. Ayo, adik-adik mahasiswa silakan maju bergerombol, maju menghadap kamera.
Boleh ke arah sini tadi ya, sini. Yang sebelah sini boleh ke sini, nggak kelihatan.
Maju aja gaya bebas, tidak usah ambil duduk. Ayo guys di sini. Ya, lebih cepat lebih baik. Lebih maju lagi kayaknya bagus deh. Bisa lebih maju lagi mahasiswa, jangan duduk berdiri. Mungkin yang di belakang agak jinjit gitu. Maju lagi ke kamera. Ngelihatnya ke kamera ya, jangan ngelihat ke screen ya. Please facing to the camera, not to the screen. Okay, guys, give applause and say hi to Professor Thomas. Okay, screenshot. Okay, once again, Okay. Baik. Thank you, Professor Thomas, once again.
Okay. Thank you very
See you
much.
again.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Thank you,
Sampai
students.
jumpa.
Dankeschön, vielen Dank.
Ja, Dankeschön.
Matur suwun.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Live ya. Makasih.